Before we get into today's sermon, I just want to introduce our new interim pastor, Pastor Peter Sung. Our denomination has sent Pastor Peter to our church to just walk with us during this time and to help us during this time. Pastor Peter will continue to introduce more and give us more information about him in his sermon. But we just wanted to say thank you, Pastor Peter, for just coming alongside LCC. Thank you for being here with us. We are so thankful to have you here, and we are eager to hear the words that God has placed in your heart to tell our church. At this time, would you join with me in listening to the sermon given by Pastor Peter?
Good morning, Logos. My name is Peter. I am a covenant pastor, and I work for the denomination as an executive coach. And I live in Seattle with my family, and I am going to be with you for this next season of your life as a church. And I was tasked with walking with you to offer leadership and coaching and consultation to help you get through to the other side of this season that you are all in. And my sort of big prayer for you and for the church is for healing and for there to be a clear path forward. I understand that there has been some conflict and there has been some trauma. And my hope is that at the end of this process together, you can begin to experience all the things that have happened as redemptive opportunities through which God works for the good. That's the promise that allows me to have hope and be with you today, that in all things, God works for the good. Not that all things are good, but that in all things, God works for the good. And so that's what I am aiming for, praying for, hoping for, and working for. And I ask you to come to see what God sees over time. As we begin this journey together, I wanted to start with a sermon that I hope lays a groundwork for our work together. The title of the sermon is El Roi, and El Roi is a Hebrew word, and it means the God who sees me. El is God, Roi, to see me, the God who sees me. And the passage that I'm going to be speaking out of is Genesis chapter 16. And before I get to that passage, I want to introduce myself. And the best way to do that, I think, is to introduce my family. I've been married to my wife, Susie, for 24 years or so. And I have 4 daughters, Emmeline, Madeline, Sophia, and Amelia. And in the picture, you can see our dog there, Bear. And that's kind of us on a typical family outing, on a hike together. And I think that was taken about a month ago in one of the mountains here in the Seattle land area. The oldest one, Emmeline, is getting ready to go to college. And the youngest one is 11 years old. Our dog Bear, who often gets accused of being a puppy, is actually 13, going on 14 this January. So enjoying him as much as we can. And I come to you as I guess my sort of working identity these days has been as a coach and psychologist, but I really was more of a church planter. That's sort of what I did for 2+ decades, kind of a serial church planter. Started one church and handed it off and did it again multiple times. And then I served as the director of church planning for the denomination, the ECC. And then I did some work with church revitalization, turning around a church that was in decline. And then currently I work as the as an executive coach for our conference churches, helping their leaders and boards and staff teams. And I also am a doctoral candidate working on a dissertation in psychology. So hopefully I can finish that up soon and be done with that part. But since I work part-time for the conference, I have some bandwidth to be with you. And so I am really looking forward to spending these next months with you and walk with you and to see where God's going to take us. Okay, so now getting on to the text for today, Genesis chapter 16. I'm going to start at verse 1, read to verse 8, and then skip to verse 13 and close there. Genesis 16, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" "I'm running away from my mistress, Sarai," she answered. And then verse 13, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." There's a lot in this passage, actually, but I want to draw your attention to the main thing that I want you to walk away with today, and that's found in verse 13. Verse 13 again says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. Now, this idea of human beings naming God is a frequent occurrence in the Bible. And it's because of what theologians call progressive revelation. And what that means is God, in his wisdom, reveals himself to us a little bit at a time, progressively over time. He doesn't reveal the whole of himself all at once, but little bits of himself over time. And the way he does that is through our own personal experiences. And so here is Hagar experiencing Yahweh, the God that she had always heard existed, but had never encountered before. She experiences God in this personal way, and out of that experience, she names him the God who sees me, and that's the phrase El Roy. And she gives you her reason for it. She says, "For I have now seen the one who sees me." And what she's saying is, God always knew me, and now I'm coming to know him. God always saw me, but now I'm catching a glimpse of him seeing me. The other thing that's really important in this story is that this is the first time in the whole Bible that we have a name for God. To me, it's just incredible that Sarai isn't the one, that Abraham isn't the one, but it's actually Hagar, the slave, the property, the non-entity, the invisible person who actually is the first to name God in the whole Bible. When God wanted to reveal himself, not just to humanity in the story, but to humanity in the Bible itself, it was important to God. It was deliberate of God to give us the very first name that God wanted to know about us, and that is El Roy. And so that's my first point here today, that the first thing that we as human beings need to know about God is that He is a God who sees us. He is a God who sees me personally, privately, comprehensively, thoroughly, exhaustively. There is no darkness in me that is not light to Him. There is no place I can hide from Him. He knows me from the beginning of time to the end of time. He knows me from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. He is the God who sees me. Where can I go from His Spirit? Where can I flee? I can't, because He is El Roy. This is important to God. And so my question for us is this: why is it so important that we know first and foremost, primarily, that God is a God who sees us? My preaching style may be different for some of you. I kind of take an interdisciplinary approach, meaning that I really like to see biblical truths appear in other disciplines and arenas. I take a consilient approach. And I see this principle in many different ways. And so I want to just name a few ways that I see the importance of seeing and being seen. The first area that I see this idea of being seen is in the parenting arena. Uh, Really famous and well known in the field child psychologist. His name is Dan Siegel. And he's done a lot of research on this idea called attunement. The word attunement means to see the other person, not just to see their external presenting behaviors, but to really track with their inner subjective realities. And so he says, when a child spills a glass of milk, a parent who is attuned does not just see the behavior, does not just react to the behavior, but understands what's happening on the inside of the child. The parent who is attuned wonders, maybe this child is experiencing some emotional distress on the inside. Or maybe this attuned parent notices not just that the milk was spilled, but that the child is fascinated by the pattern that the spilt milk is making on the table or the floor. This parent is looking beyond the external appearance of things, but is looking into the heart of the child, looking into the hard wiring of the child, is curious about the child's makeup and preferences and personality and traits and states and future of this child, right? And we know God is like that. One of the things we learn about God is that He does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance of things, but God looks at the heart. That's the lesson that God taught to the prophet Samuel when he went to anoint the next king of Israel. And he was looking at all of David's older brothers and ignoring David because he wasn't even there. And then even when he came, he thought he was just too young and too small, too ruddy looking. But God is the God who sees. And Dan Siegel says this. He says that the single most important parental act that parents can do is to be attuned to their child. That there's nothing quite like a parent who is really seeing their child, of primary importance, Siegel says. Second example, socially speaking, Brene Brown says, the single most important way that we have to relate to each other is to see each other. She calls this empathy. If you don't have empathy for the other person, you can't build on this relationship. This connection doesn't amount to much unless you begin to see the other person through their own subjective reality that's tracking with them and what's happening on the inside, their mind states. It's primary. Third is the arena of marriage. John Gottman is the world's premier marriage and relationship expert. And he says the single most important thing that couples must do is to see each other. That if they don't really see each other, then in the marriage, something called contempt can begin to grow, and contempt leads to separation. Of primary importance to marriage, Gottman says, is seeing your spouse. One of the leaders of the leadership field today is a man named Daniel Goleman. And he says the single most important thing that leaders must do, this is the primary act, the first act of a leader, the foundational act of a leader, is to see the people who follow them, to really track with their inner subjective realities. It's an intelligence-based leadership, not just general leadership principles, but leadership that's based on specific information that the leader knows about the people that they are leading. I'll give you a fifth example. Social media. It's basically taken over our sort of the way we relate to each other, the way of life for human beings across the globe is it revolves around something that we can call social media. And what is really the essence of social media? The entire platform is driven by our desire and our need to be seen. It's people crying out to be noticed, to be attuned to. So here's 5 examples. Forces that drive human beings forward really have to do with this idea of seeing and being seen. And I think this corroborates what we learn about God in Genesis 16. When God wanted to reveal himself to us, he wanted us to know first and foremost that he is the God who sees. In the story of Hagar in Genesis 16, we learn that Hagar was an abuse victim. She was in pain. She was isolated and self-isolated. She had run away from her abusive masters. And in effect, she ran away into the wilderness to commit a kind of double suicide for herself and for her unborn child. She came to a point where she no longer wanted to live, and she had nothing to live for because she didn't matter, and she felt her baby didn't matter. Nothing in her life mattered. She was helpless and powerless and in pain. And it is in this very vulnerable moment that God chooses to reveal himself to her as the God who sees her. Hagar, I want you to know, first and foremost, that I see you. Hagar, before you understand anything else about me, I need you to know that you are not invisible. I'm tracking with you. I am attuned to you. I was meditating on this idea, and I was thinking about how important it is in my marriage for I to be seen and for me to see my wife. Same thing in my role as a parent. The thing that I want my kids to know without a shadow of a doubt is that I see them. I see you. I know what you're going through. I know what you're experiencing. I know how things look and feel from your perspective. I'm going to set aside my agenda. I'm going to set aside my value system. I'm not going to impose myself and my will and my wishes on you. First and foremost, I want to check in with you. I want to know what's going on with you. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? Tell me. I want to connect with you. You matter to me. Who you are, what you want, what you hope for, what gives you joy, what causes you pain. These are important things to me because I see you. This is what I want my kids to know, first and foremost. And I was thinking about this with suffering in general. Uh, I think really at the heart of it, what I really want more than any other reward is to be recognized, to be seen. And I think if I knew that um, somebody was bearing witness to my plight, to my suffering, to my experience, I think I can endure. I think I can go through things that I otherwise might not be able to go through if I wasn't being seen. I think even if I want monetary rewards or some kind of acknowledgement, I think really what I'm after is actually just somebody to see me. And I think if I knew somebody was seeing me, that would be enough. Even something like money is just symbolic. It's a sign to me. It's emblematic of the fact that somebody's acknowledging my skills or my effort or my value. Um, I know that the church has been going through a difficult season. I'm beginning to understand it more and more, and I hope to, expand my awareness of the full story from all different perspectives. But I want you to know that if you know that you are seen, you might be able to let go of having to be right, of having to be first. You might be able to forgive. You might be able to move forward. You might be able to start looking ahead instead of continually being anchored to the past. I know that's true for me. Here's the other thing that we learn from Hagar's story. We learn that Abraham didn't see her. He wasn't capable of it. We know that Sarai didn't see her. She wasn't capable of it. But God sees her. And God seeing her and her seeing that God sees her was all sufficient for her. And she returned home. I want you to understand that people will always fail us. People will always fail at seeing us the way we really ought to be seen. They will miss the truth. They will miss the nuance. They will judge. They will see through biases. They will see through their own agendas. But God will never do that. For God does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance of things, but God looks at the heart. And so I guess that's my prayer for us, that you would come to that place where God seeing you becomes sufficient because you are able to see that God sees you. I want to end the sermon with a verse from Psalm 121. And after I read this verse, I'm going to say a prayer for us. And so I'm going to ask you to bow your heads now as I read from Psalm 121. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will watch over your coming and going, both now and forever. God, thank you for this powerful truth that you are the God who sees us. Not just us, but you are the God who sees me. God, I pray for myself and for all those who are at Logos. I pray that each person would somehow come to see that you see them. And I pray that this knowing that you see them would release them from any stronghold over their heart, from any kind of unforgiveness or resentment or hurt or bitterness. God, I pray that this knowing that you see them would release them to experience freedom and joy and love. I pray that this knowledge that you see them would create steps for them to take towards one another, that they will be able to turn towards each other once again. And though I know that the process could take some time, I pray that the process would begin in a way that we know is beginning, that we would begin to get a glimpse and a taste of your work in this way. God, but this is our first prayer, that you reveal to us that you see us. Thank you for this truth, and we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.